And from the beginning, he was putting Africans in London, the Irish in Britain, and so on, into his historical study of a working class that happens to be within the boundaries of a particular nation state, but is not purely English. And that's something that I really want to come back to in a moment. Moreover, in Peter's work, modes of life, forms of solidarity, everyday practices of resistance become the very texture of class struggle. Class struggle does not look like some great collision between abstracted structures. It becomes literally the medium in which people are living particular kinds of social relationships. And so when he comes to, and this is my second theme in introducing Peter, the first is history from below, the second is really class, property, and enclosure. One of the things that animates his work in my reading across this second theme is working out what will later get known or described as the technologies of domination. Peter actually attends to the architectures and technologies of enclosure and the ways in which they were lived. I'm delighted to see, by the way, that in Stop Thief, his early essay on Karl Marx and the wood thefts is finally available again for us, because for people like myself, as a student and coming to these important questions, that essay was huge to bring back Marx's early writing on the wood thefts and to say to us it's not just in the primitive accumulation section in Capital that Marx is interested in these problems. These are formative, and we need to always be reading and engaging Marx in these terms too. So it's wonderful to see that Stop Thief has that essay. But I want to give you one little passage. I mean, I could, you know, if you would allow me, and you wouldn't, but I could spend hours here talking about the London Hand. But I'm just going to give you one little passage where Peter tries to give us a feeling for the lived architecture of enclosure in the urban setting. And this is in the context of writing about what is known as the Gordon Riots. And Peter says, the control of space is the essence of private property, and its architecture became more complex. Yards, fences, railings, and gates formed an outer perimeter. Stairwells, doors, rooms, and closets, an inner one. Bureau, chests, cabinets, case desks, and drawers protected the items of private property themselves. Each space was controlled by locks, and access to each required a key. And then, of course, he will turn in the wonderful narrative of the Gordon Riots to the moment where the insurgents grab the keys and wave them before the crowd at the Newgate prison. Okay, they're now liberating the prison and seizing the keys and waving them before the insurgents becomes this absolutely pivotal, dramatic moment in Peter's narrative. Part of what he's doing there is something that Peter insists on across all of his work, which is that when we return to the theme of the commons, let's not forget that, like class, these are practices. And so Peter introduces for us the term commoning. We're not just accessing the commons, we're commoning. In other words, there are particular social relations, bonds of solidarity, communal practices, and so on that are at work here. And this takes me to the final theme, which is, I think, the richest conception we have in radical historiography of the proletariat as, to use Marx's term, the unity of the diverse. In other words, unlike certain kinds of traditions on the left, which try to create class as a homogenizing category that obliterates the differences and the diversity of social experience that nevertheless exists within social contexts and groups of people. with common interests and common relationships to these social organization as a whole, Peter is incredibly attuned to the diverse sets of experiences that need to be named. And so the Irish are named, the Africans who actually play this leading role in the Gordon riots of 1780 in London are named. Peter gives us intellectual and political itineraries of these people. And I'm going to let Peter in on a secret, but also all of you in the room. I have long gone around trumpeting another essay that maybe it's been republished, but I don't think it has, that of Peter's from the early 1980s that I absolutely love, and it is called "What if C.L.R. James had met E.P. Thompson in 1792?" And Peter says, let's look at the way these two great works begin. And we start with James, the Black Jacobins, his story of the Haitian Revolution. And then we'll move to London and the story that Thompson tells us in the making of the English working class. Now let's imagine these two characters meeting in 1792 in one of the great radical hangouts in London. And he suggests that a former slave probably would have introduced them to one another. And he builds this beautiful discussion of the global histories of capitalism on the one hand, and the global histories of the proletariat on the other. And I'm just going to give you my two favorite passages from, well, yeah, okay, I'll just give you two. I was going to give you three, but from that, and then conclude. Peter says, the two themes, the surge to freedom of the Afro-American slaves and the making of the English working class, can no longer be separated as part of the fragmentation of nations or of labor powers that a capitalist unity requires. This is what I mean by the unity of the diverse that Marx talks about in the famous introduction to the Grundrisse. These histories must be thought together. And of course, most famously, Peter does that with his friend and comrade Marcus Rediker in The Many-Headed Hydra. But he's doing it across a whole series of other texts, and I find it so interesting that but in the early 1980s, Peter is already setting out that problem. And then he comes back at the end to Thompson and to James. And he writes, burning for the future and searching for a fulcrum that was neither Stalinist nor liberal, they both, Thompson and James, returned to the 1790s. James, of course, returns to the Haitian Revolution. Thompson's returning to the London Corresponding Society and its activists meeting in pubs in London, and so on. They return to the 1790s, the last great worldwide crisis, to analyze the movement of the workers of the world. Neither of them, as far as I know, saw Equiano Ulada, sitting in the back of the room at the Bell being the pub where the radicals meet, ready to pass his experience on. And then he has Equiano gesturing, Brother Thompson, may I present Brother James. And comrades and friends, may I present Peter Langland.